Let me give you a little challenge. Not for a month, not for a year, just 3 days. For the next 3 days, I want you to become intensely aware of one thing. Most people spend their lives trying to change the outside, how they look, how much money they make, how others see them, but very few stop to ask what's happening on the inside, because that's where the real battle is won or lost. See, every single day, whether you realize it or not, you're running a conversation in your mind. It's like a background soundtrack that plays while you're going through life. That conversation, the words, the tone, the beliefs, it's not just noise, it's shaping you. What you tell yourself repeatedly becomes your identity, and your identity dictates your decisions. Your decisions build your habits create your results. That's the chain. It all starts with a thought, a phrase, a quiet whisper in your own mind that says, "This is who I am." And the problem is, most of those phrases didn't come from you. You didn't sit down and decide, "I want to believe I'm not good enough," or "I'm always behind," or "I never follow through." No, those were picked up somewhere along the way from a parent who didn't know how to love, a teacher who made you feel small, a friend who hurt you, or a failure that made you feel ashamed. And after enough repetition, those thoughts became a story, a personal narrative, a lens through which you started seeing the world and, worse, yourself. But here's the part that matters. You're not born with that story. You're taught it. And if it can be taught, it can be rewritten. Most people wait for the world to validate their worth. They wait for success to give them permission to feel confident. But it doesn't work like that. Because confidence doesn't come after achievement, it comes before it. It's not the result of belief, it's the cause of belief. You don't accomplish big things and then feel worthy. You feel worthy, and that gives you the power to go after big things. And that's why your self-talk matters more than you think. We'll get practical. Imagine two people walking into the same job interview. They have the same experience, same education, same skills. But one of them walks in thinking, "I hope they don't find out I'm not that smart. I always mess these things up." The other walks in thinking, "I've prepared for this. I have something valuable to offer. I belong in this room." Who do you think makes a better impression? Who do you think the world responds to? That's the power of self-talk. It creates a frequency. It affects your energy, your confidence, your posture, your tone of voice, even the way you make eye contact. The first person is already apologizing for being in the room. The second person is owning the moment. And what's crazy is the difference between them isn't talent. It's language. You become what you repeatedly tell yourself. Say it enough and it becomes your default, your operating system, your truth. And that truth, whether it's built on strength or shame, becomes the ceiling of your life. That's why you have to be intentional. You can't afford to speak to yourself like a stranger, or worse, like a critic. You have to become your own source of alignment, your own encourager, your own internal guide. Because if you wait for someone else to speak those words, you'll be waiting forever. And even if they do say them, if you don't believe them yourself, they won't stick. I'm not talking about ego or arrogance. I'm not talking about standing in the mirror yelling, "I'm amazing," over and over again. I'm talking about building a consistent, honest, empowering inner dialogue. Something like, "I've made mistakes, but I'm learning. I've failed before, but I'm still moving forward. I may not be there yet, but I'm not where I started. I have value, I have strength, I have a future." That's not fantasy, that's fuel. Because here's what no one tells you. The world is already trying to talk you out of your power. It's loud with distraction, it's full of doubt. If you don't have a strong internal voice, you'll get swept away by everything around you. You'll be at the mercy of criticism, rejection, and circumstances. But if your voice is strong, if your self-talk is grounded in truth and growth, you can face anything. You can walk through storms and still know who you are. You can hear no 1,000 times and still move forward with clarity. because the voice inside you is louder than the noise outside. And that voice is trained, not gifted. You train it through repetition, through intentionality, through conscious effort. Every time you catch yourself saying something destructive, you replace it. Every time you're tempted to belittle yourself, you interrupt the pattern, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. No, the most dangerous things in life isn't failure or rejection or even pain. It's unawareness. Because what you don't realize, you can't change. And for most people, the most destructive patterns they face aren't external circumstances. They're internal conversations they don't even know they're having. Negative self-talk isn't always loud. Sometimes it doesn't shout, it whispers, it hides behind sarcasm. It disguises itself as humility. It comes in phrases like, I'm just being honest, or I'm not good at that, or that's just who I am. But behind those words is something much deeper, a belief system you never consciously agreed to. We all pick up beliefs from somewhere. As kids, we absorb the environment we grow up in. If we hear our parents talk about money like it's scarce and shameful, we begin to think success is wrong. If we're criticized constantly or only praised when we achieve something, we learn that our worth is conditional. These lessons aren't taught through textbooks, they're absorbed through emotion. And once they're in, they settle. And once they settle, they speak. That's how unconscious self-talk is born, 1,000 small moments, unprocessed and unchecked, forming a script you didn't write, but now you perform every single day. And here's what makes it dangerous. Because it's unconscious, it feels like truth. You don't question it. It doesn't feel like negativity. It just feels like you. So when your mind says you'll never pull this off, or don't bother, they won't pick you, you nod and agree. Because the voice sounds familiar. It's been there for years, it's become part of your identity. But familiarity doesn't equal truth. And repetition doesn't mean accuracy. The problem is we live in a world that teaches us to filter our words around others, but never teaches us how to filter our words around ourselves. You're taught not to be rude to strangers, not to gossip, not to insult people. And yet, you're allowed to insult yourself every single day without a second thought. You call yourself lazy, undisciplined, ugly, worthless, and somehow that's acceptable. But imagine this. Imagine saying to your best friend the things you say to yourself when you're alone. Imagine calling someone else a failure after one mistake. Imagine rolling your eyes at someone's dream just because it doesn't look polished yet. You'd never do it, so why is it okay when the target is you? That's the trap. You're not just surrounded by negativity, you're repeating it. You're reinforcing it. And the worst part is, you don't even notice it's happening until you become conscious. And that's the shift. That's the moment things begin to change, because once you're aware of the voice, you can challenge it. You can look it in the eye and ask, where did you come from? Who taught me to think this way? Do I even believe this anymore? That's when the spell starts to break. That's when the fog begins to lift. You can't fix what you won't face, and you can't face what you won't name. So you start by paying attention. Catch the patterns, write them down if you have to. What are the things I keep saying about myself that I'd never say to anyone else? That list is your prison, and you can't escape a prison you won't acknowledge. The truth is, negative self-talk isn't you. It's an echo of who you used to be, or worse, who someone else convinced you to be, but now you're older, wiser, and you get to choose differently. You get to stop carrying those broken phrases like they're sacred. You get to reframe, reclaim, rewrite, because the voice inside your head, it's not a narrator, it's a creator. And it's creating you. Whether it's building you or breaking you depends on whether you're willing to take the wheel or let your past keep driving. It's easy to believe that what we say to others holds the most weight, that once something is spoken out loud, it gains power. And while that's true to an extent, it's only half the picture. Because the most powerful conversations you will ever have aren't the ones you have in a room full of people. They're the ones you have in silence. The ones no one hears but you. You see, the words you say to the world may influence people, but the words you say to yourself, those shape your destiny. They're the blueprint, the instruction manual, the lens through which you interpret every experience, every failure, every relationship, every opportunity. When you speak to yourself, even in your thoughts, your brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. It accepts the words as truth. It takes them literally. Tell yourself you're a failure often enough and your body responds with the same stress as if someone screamed it in your face. Tell yourself you're not lovable and you'll start sabotaging the connections that try to enter your life. Tell yourself you can't lead and you'll never raise your hand when the opportunity presents itself. That's the silent sabotage that happens not with action, but with internal language. And it happens fast. Because your subconscious is always listening. And unlike the conscious mind, the subconscious doesn't debate, it doesn't question, it simply absorbs and obeys. That's why your inner words are so much more dangerous or powerful than you think. They are instructions your life follows. Think about it. How many times have you caught yourself shrinking from a challenge, not because you couldn't do it, but because you told yourself you couldn't? How many times have you avoided speaking up, not because you didn't have something to say, but because you convinced yourself your voice didn't matter? You did it with your own voice, quietly, repeatedly. We often wait for someone else to encourage us, to recognize our value, to lift us out of a slump. But the truth is, if your internal voice is harsh, no amount of external praise will ever feel enough. Compliments bounce off, success feels hollow. You doubt even the good because inside, you're still carrying old scripts, rehearsing old wounds. That's why your self-talk can't be left to autopilot. Because whether you're aware of it or not, it's constantly creating your experience. Two people can live through the same situation and have completely different outcomes, not because the circumstances were different, but because the voice in their head interpreted it differently. One person says, "This setback proves I'm not cut out for this." The other says, "This setback is preparing me for something greater." One walks away discouraged, the other walks away determined. Same event, different inner dialogue. And that inner dialogue becomes the difference between quitting and persevering, between surviving. You don't have to shout affirmations from the rooftop. This isn't about performance. It's about consistency, quiet, intentional self-leadership. When you wake up, speak to yourself like someone whose day matters. When you fall short, speak to yourself like someone who deserves to get back up. When you dream big, speak to yourself like someone who believes in the possibility. This is not about lying to yourself. It's about choosing a more empowering truth. You're not perfect, no one is. But you are capable, you are growing, you are learning, and if you speak to yourself through that lens, something incredible happens. Your mindset shifts, your behavior follows, and your life begins to respond. The words you speak inwardly become the foundation for everything you build, not just your career, not just your relationships, but your entire sense of identity. And when you finally start treating those words with the seriousness they deserve, you gain access to a whole new level of power. When people hear about positive self-talk, they often assume it means ignoring reality, telling yourself things that aren't true, pretending everything is fine when it's not. And that's why so many resist it. They don't want to feel like they're being fake. But here's what most people miss. Changing your self-talk doesn't mean you ignore your flaws or mistakes. It means you stop exaggerating them and start telling the whole truth, not just the painful parts. See, most people don't lie to themselves by being overly positive. They lie to themselves by being selectively negative. They zoom in on one failure and act like it defines their whole identity. They make a small misstep and turn it into a character flaw. They experience rejection and decide they're unworthy. That's not honesty. Let's say you procrastinated this week. That's a fact. But your mind doesn't stop there. It says, "You're lazy. You always do this. You're never going to change." None of those things are facts. They're conclusions. Harsh, sweeping conclusions built on one moment of struggle, and if you say it often enough, you start to believe it's who you are. But it's not. That's not the whole story. That's not the whole truth. The full truth is, yes, you procrastinated, but you also care deeply about doing a good job. You also showed up even when you didn't feel like it last week. You've been improving in ways that aren't loud but are real. That's the other side. That's what your self-talk has been ignoring. And until you start telling that part of the story too, you'll keep walking around with a warped view of yourself. Changing your self-talk is about balance. It's about stepping back from the emotion and asking what's true and what's just a reaction. You're not pretending you're flawless. You're refusing to pretend you're hopeless. You're speaking to yourself the way a great coach would. Not sugarcoating the struggle, but not letting it define you either. Imagine you're mentoring someone who's trying to grow. They slip up. They lose focus. Would you look at them and say, "You're a lost cause"? Of course not. You'd remind them of their progress. You'd point to their effort. You'd give them perspective. So why not offer yourself that same respect? And here's the thing, when you start telling the whole truth, something shifts inside you. You stop seeing yourself as a problem to fix and start seeing yourself as a person in progress. That subtle shift changes how you approach everything. Your work, your relationships, your habits. You start acting from hope, not from shame. And hope builds momentum. Shame paralyzes. It makes you feel like there's no point in trying, that you've always been this way, that nothing will ever stick. But hope says, you've got a chance. Hope reminds you that even if you've fallen 100 times, you're still in the fight. And hope is what turns effort into transformation. But hope needs to be fed, and the way you feed it is through your words. Every time you choose to tell yourself the whole truth, you strengthen your belief in your own capacity. Not through delusion, but through clarity, through balance, through deeper understanding that you are not your worst moment. You are not your weakest habit. You are not a finished story. And once you realize that, you begin to carry yourself differently. You don't lower your eyes when you talk about your goals. You don't flinch when someone challenges you. You stand a little taller, not because you're pretending to be someone you're not, but because you're finally seeing who you've always been beneath the criticism, the labels, and the lies. Most people don't wake up in the morning thinking, today is going to be amazing. They wake up bracing for impact, bracing for bad news, bracing for another letdown. And it's not because they're naturally pessimistic. It's because they've been conditioned by repeated disappointment. And over time, that conditioning becomes expectation. Somewhere along the way, they stopped believing that good things were meant for them. Not because they didn't want good things, but because life taught them to play it safe. Maybe it was a dream that didn't work out, a relationship that ended badly, a goal they didn't reach. And with each letdown, they started building a shield, a psychological armor made of lowered expectations. If I don't expect much, I won't get hurt. But here's the truth that most people miss. When you lower your expectations to protect yourself from pain, you also block yourself from progress. You can't build a great life from a place of defense. You build it from vision, from belief, from stretching your mind toward what's possible, not what's probable based on the past. Think about how many opportunities you've hesitated on, not because they weren't right for you, but because your mind whispered, don't get your hopes up. That one sentence has killed more potential than failure ever could. It sounds wise, even mature, but really it's fear in disguise. It's the voice of a mind that's been trained to avoid disappointment at all costs, even if it means avoiding growth. You weren't born with that voice. You learned it. You learned it from patterns, from people, from pain. But what you learned, you can unlearn. And that begins with a simple but powerful shift. Stop asking, what if this goes wrong? And start asking, what if this goes right? This isn't about ignoring risk. It's about opening your mind to both outcomes. Because for too long, you've only focused on one. When your mind is trained for disappointment, it becomes a magnet for worst-case scenarios. You see danger where there's only discomfort. You see rejection where there's only silence. You pull back before the world ever gets a chance to say yes. But when you start retraining your mind for possibility, everything changes. You begin to act from hope, not from habit. You begin to try again, not because you're sure of the outcome, but because you've stopped letting the past dictate your future. Retraining your mind is like strengthening a muscle. It's not about one big moment of clarity, it's about repetition. It's about catching the thought that says, this probably won't work, and replacing it with, let's see what happens. It's about stepping into new situations with curiosity instead of caution. It's about giving yourself permission to believe in good outcomes, even if they haven't happened yet. Because here's the real tragedy of expecting disappointment. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you expect little, you show up half-hearted, you hesitate, you hold back, and life responds to that energy. You don't get the opportunity, not because you weren't worthy, but because you didn't fully reach for it. But when you show up expecting something meaningful, you carry yourself differently. You speak with more conviction. You move with more intent. And that energy creates openings. It shifts how people see you. It shifts how you see yourself. Your mind is not your enemy. It's your tool. It's your ally. But it needs direction. Left unchecked, it will default to the pattern it knows best, protection. But given the right instructions, given the right practice, it can begin to anticipate good things again. It can learn to see doors where it used to see walls. It can start welcoming possibility instead of flinching from it. Every transformation begins with a decision, but it is sustained by conversation. Not with others, but with yourself. You can set goals, you can write down dreams, you can sign up for programs, buy the books, and attend the seminars. But if your internal dialogue doesn't shift, your results won't either. Because you can't build a new life on an old narrative. That voice in your head, it runs the show. It's the narrator of your story. It colors how you interpret your circumstances. It tells you what's possible, what's off limits, what's worth pursuing, and what isn't even worth trying. And most people never question that voice. They don't stop to ask where it came from or whether it's still serving them. They just keep repeating it like it's gospel. You cannot continue to tell yourself, I'm not good with people, and expect to grow your network. You cannot continue to say, I've never been disciplined, and expect to build a habit. You cannot say, I always mess things up, and expect to rise when opportunity calls. These phrases might feel familiar. They might even sound harmless, but they're not. They're anchors. Quiet, subtle chains wrapped in the tone of self-awareness. But make no mistake, they're holding you back. And if you want to move forward, if you want to actually live a different kind of life, those chains have to be broken. Not by pretending everything's perfect, but by changing the way you speak to yourself about your imperfections. By shifting the way you narrate your own growth. Instead of, I've never been consistent, try, I'm learning to follow through. Instead of, I can't lead, you see the difference? One keeps you stuck, the other pulls you forward. Your life can't rise above the language you use to describe it. That's why changing your words isn't just about positivity, it's about alignment. You can't ask the world for opportunity and then talk yourself out of everyone that comes your way. You can't visualize success while verbalizing defeat. Your internal dialogue must match the direction you want to go. Otherwise, you'll stay in emotional limbo, hoping for change but arguing against it every single day inside your own mind. And make no mistake, your internal dialogue becomes your emotional home. Some people live in a house of blame, others live in fear, some dwell in criticism, always expecting themselves to fall short. And you can feel it in their energy. The weight of their thoughts shows up in how they walk, how they speak, how they carry themselves. Because your internal language is not silent, it shows. It shapes your presence, influences your tone, it directs your behavior. But the opposite is also true. Speak strength long enough, and it becomes your state. Speak compassion to yourself, and you move through life with softer confidence. Speak vision, and you begin to notice doors that were always there, but that you never had the mindset to walk through. And here's the real shift. When your inner voice starts to support the life you're trying to build, everything outside of you begins to respond. You stop hesitating when it's time to act. You stop second-guessing when you feel inspired. You stop needing constant external validation because you've already got internal agreement. That's power. That's the foundation of real, sustainable change. If the life you want feels far away, it's not always because the path is too hard. It's often because your inner voice keeps turning you around. It keeps reminding you of what you used to be. But who you used to be is not who you have to be. Not if you're willing to change the story. Not if you're ready to change the tone. Because your life cannot expand until your voice does. For years, maybe even decades, you've rehearsed the language of limitation. You've repeated words that kept you small. You've told yourself what you're not, what you'll never be, how far behind you are, and how impossible it feels to catch up. And those words didn't just come out of your mouth. They came out of your belief system, out of your memory, out of old wounds you never really stopped nursing. Somewhere back there, something taught you to play it safe with your voice, to keep your expectations low and your hope even lower. Maybe it was a parent who never affirmed you. Maybe it was a failure that embarrassed you. Maybe it was years of rejection that made you think you were the problem. So you stopped expecting the win. You stopped preparing for the good. You started living like the best you could hope for was survival, not success. But let's be honest, how long are you going to keep speaking that way? How long are you going to describe yourself with language that limits you? How long are you going to speak from pain instead of potential? Because at some point, survival mode has to end. At some point, you have to shift into preparation, into vision, into readiness. Not for more disappointment, but for breakthrough. You don't have to wait until everything is fixed to start speaking differently. That's the lie. That you have to wait until you're confident to speak with confidence. That you have to wait until you're fully healed to talk like you're whole. But transformation doesn't work that way. You speak as if until it becomes. That's what faith sounds like. Start speaking like someone who's getting ready to rise. Speak like someone who believes the next chapter could be the best one. Speak like someone who's tired of rehearsing heartbreak and ready to practice victory. Not because life is perfect, but because you're tired of speaking like a victim of it. Speak from your future, not just your failures. Because language isn't just a reflection of belief, it builds belief. Every time you speak strength over yourself, your identity shifts. Every time you say, I'm capable, a part of you listens. Every time you say, I'm becoming someone I'm proud of, your actions follow. Every time you catch yourself saying, I can't, and replace it with, I'm learning how, you chip away at the story that's kept you stuck. You are not weak for needing to change your words. You're wise for realizing the power they hold, because your words shape the emotional climate you live in. Think about it. Someone who constantly says, I'm exhausted, will feel tired before they even move. Someone who always says, I'm behind, will rush through life in constant panic. And someone who says, I'll never figure this out, won't even try. But someone who says, I got this, changes the way they breathe. Someone who says, I'm showing up anyway, carries themselves differently. Someone who says, "I'm built for more," begins to see options that fear once blinded them from. This is the internal shift that separates people who just dream from people who rise. People who win don't just visualize the finish line. They speak to themselves like winners long before anyone else sees the result. Their language reflects the person they're becoming, not the version they're trying to escape. So ask yourself, what kind of person are you preparing to become? Because your words are already practicing for it. They're rehearsing your future, whether you know it or not. And if you've spent too long rehearsing doubt, insecurity, shame, or smallness, now is the time to pivot, not just in your plans, in your voice. You've been given a mind that listens to every word you say. And for too long, you've been feeding it the language of defeat. You've been training it to expect disappointment, to shrink from risk, to assume the worst, and then you wonder why your life feels stuck. But what if the breakthrough you've been waiting for isn't in the world around you, but in the words inside you? What if the next level of your life doesn't start with more hustle, but with more honesty about how you've been speaking to yourself? You are not broken, you are becoming. You are not lost, you are learning to lead yourself. And that begins with a new conversation, one where your words don't just reflect your pain, but declare your power. One where your inner voice no longer talks like a prisoner of the past, but like a leader of your future. For 3 days, just 3, speak like the version of you that's tired of quitting. Talk to yourself like someone who refuses to be a victim of old narratives. Get intentional, get personal, get bold. Let your own voice become the fuel that ignites your comeback. Speak the truth, not just about where you've been, but about where you're going. And when you do, you'll feel it, the shift, the momentum, the return of belief. Because when you speak like someone who's preparing to win, the world starts to take you seriously. But more importantly, you start to take yourself seriously. So no more, "I can't." No more, "I always mess up." No more apologizing for wanting more. Talk to yourself like your life depends on it, because it does. Now, folks, you've got 3 days to speak like the future's listening, because it is.